Hi, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing really well. My name is Anand and I'm a sculptor and 3D modeler. What you just saw is my digital study of David by Gian Lorenzo Bernini, who is one of my favorite sculptors of all time. Bernini lived in 17th century Italy and he was one of the most prolific and influential sculptors of his time. He was part of what is known as the Baroque movement in art history. Copying from the works of masters has been an important part of artistic training for centuries and is still followed in studios and schools around the world. I've been doing master studies as part of my digital sculpting practice, and it has been hugely beneficial to my growth as an artist. In this series of videos, I'll share with you my process of sculpting David in ZBrush and also show you how I texture the model in Substance Painter and set up the lighting, shading and final rendering in Blender. I hope you find it useful as well as enjoyable. If you do, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel if you would like to see more of this kind of content. Also, please check out my website and follow me on Instagram if you would like to see more of my work. The links are in the description below. Alright, I'll see you in a moment. Alright, let's start by collecting some reference material. Obviously there are tons of images of David on the internet. We just need to pick the ones that are most suitable to our purpose. Michelangelo's David is the more famous one, so that's the one that'll pop up first when you search for David. So you'll have to search for Bernini's David specifically. I use a program called PureRef to organize my reference images. It allows you to drag and drop images from your hard disk or your internet browser and arrange them on a canvas the way you like it. By all means, try to find images that show the sculpture in its entirety from as many different angles as possible. But keep in mind that there will be perspective distortion. People shoot these photos inside museums, right? So they have to use wider angle lenses, so there will be perspective distortion. But of course, we should grab what we can find and make allowances for the distortion while sculpting. Definitely add some close-up images, as many good ones as you can find. That should be enough for now, I think. We'll find more if we need them later. Alright, before jumping headfirst into ZBrush or anything, let's pause for a moment and take a measure of the subject that we are going to sculpt. I usually spend some time sketching the subject with pencil and paper, sometimes even a ball pen. It helps me understand the subject better and also helps me plan a few things before I start sculpting. I'll just use Photoshop instead of pencil and paper for the purpose of this demonstration. The figure of David is definitely our main focus here, and the first thing about drawing the figure is to find the gesture. Now if you blur your eyes and try to see David without all the complexity, imagine him as a stick figure. You'll probably see that single curved line that goes from his neck to his left foot that dominates the whole sculpture. We can take this as the line of action and build the whole figure from it. This sort of simplification saves us from getting lost when we add some of the more complex forms later on. Once you have formed a good idea of the gesture, you can then move on to the more structural aspects of the figure, like the comparative size and volume of the head, the rib cage and the pelvis, their relative positions, rotation, tilt, etc. Make sure that you spend enough time on the drawing board at this stage, because these drawing exercises can form sort of a blueprint of the sculpture in your mind. Alright, we are in ZBrush and we are ready to sculpt. Obviously there are dozens of ways to do this in ZBrush. You can start with a Z-sphere mannequin and pose it and then convert it into a base mesh that you can sculpt. Or you can use any of the number of really nice base models that ZBrush comes with. You can find them under Lightbox. I prefer to use a base mesh that I modeled in Maya many years ago. It's quite low resolution, so I find it easier to pose and generally deform and modify. It would be more logical to start with the gesture, just like we did in Photoshop, But I do want to get some basic sculpting done before we get into the pose and the line of action and everything. Because once I get the model into pose, I will no longer be able to use symmetry. Of course, everything will be asymmetric in the end, but it'll be easier and less confusing if you can sculpt both sides simultaneously to start with. Normally I would just start sculpting directly on the base mesh, but let's use a sphere for this one so that we can explore the structure of the head a little bit. So we'll leave the base mesh as it is and append a sphere, scale it down, move it into position, and we'll make it roughly the size of the cranium on the base mesh. That feels about right. Now let's hide the base mesh. Okay, I've downloaded some skull images to help us along with our head study. These are fairly orthographic, so they should be easy to work with. Let's start with the top view because it's a good place to start. It's quite an easy egg shape that we see here with a little flattening at the front. Let's go back to our sphere. We're looking at it from the top view, as you can see in the cam view at the top right hand corner. Now we'll use the move tool to push and pull the outline of the sphere, shaping it like an egg in the top view, rotating to the side view, and again using the move tool. The side is again almost an egg shape. The back looks more to me like a box with rounded corners. The front is about the same, just smaller. Just a bit of polishing, making sure everything is nice and round. I'm using the inflate tool, by the way. Just lightly sculpting in the brow ridge, shaping that forehead a little better. Now maybe we can start building the lower part of the head, which is most of the face, the part where most of our sense organs reside. We'll add another sphere for the face, just to keep it distinct from the cranium for the time being. Flattening the side a little bit. Oops, forgot to turn on symmetry. Not to worry, Smart Resim to the rescue. Alright, we are going to treat this as a study of the skull to start with and then build it up from there, because understanding the underlying anatomy is important. We'll sculpt one aspect at a time, just like we did for the cranium. As for proportions, I tend to place the eyes about halfway between the top of the head and the chin, the tip of the nose halfway between the eyes and the chin, and then again the mouth about halfway between the tip of the nose and the chin. Of course, it can vary from individual to individual, but I find that it is a good rule of thumb to start with. We are starting to add some more definition to those bony landmarks now. The brow ridge and then the cheekbone. The mouth can be a little tricky to sculpt because it can easily go flat if you're not conscious of the nearly cylindrical structure that it actually is. It's one of the reasons to practice drawing the skull from as many different angles as possible. Just think that your front teeth are arranged in a semicircle and the lips wrap around them. Or think of it as drawing lips on a coffee mug. This can actually be a bigger challenge if you're painting, because then you have to create the illusion of roundness. In any case, I would say draw a lot of skulls. Using the trim dynamic brush to flatten some of those planes. I don't generally use a lot of different brushes. I use the standard, the inflate, and the move brushes for general sculpting, then the damp standard for creases. I use the clay brush to quickly build up form and volume. I very rarely use the clay build-up brush because it can be a little tricky to clean up if you don't want the brush strokes to be visible. We're almost done with our skull study now. Ready to move on to adding more features. The nose is not actually part of the skull, it's cartilage. Anyway, making a few adjustments before we merge the two parts of our skull. Merge down, do a dynamesh. We should make sure that we have enough resolution. Let's attach the neck before going any further with the sculpting. We'll use a cylinder this time. We'll make some minor adjustments before merging it down and updating the dynamesh. Now, we don't need to really sculpt the ears in this one because David has no ears in the original. I mean, they are hidden beneath his hair. But I'm gonna sculpt them anyway because they're an important landmark on the head, and you can use them as a point of reference for placing the other features. Also, they are very interesting to sculpt. So we have placed a squashed cylinder in the appropriate place and also added a sphere in the back as a filler. Now we'll merge them together and do a mirror before merging them to the main head mesh. We'll use the mirror feature from the Subtool Master plugin. Now we'll merge them with the head subtool and update the dynamesh on it. Just making sure the resolution is enough. Now, before going any further, we need to check whether the head is sitting in well with the rest of the body. Okay, it may be a little too big and a little too low on the neck. We'll hide the head on the base mesh and just a few more adjustments. Now the head to body size ratio, as you may have noticed, is critical to the perceived physical stature of a figure. If you look at David in the original, he looks like a big tall guy, but it's not just because the sculpture itself is more than life size. Even if you scale him down to life size or even less than life size, he'll still look like a tall guy, and that's mainly because of the size of his head in relation to his body. If you scale his head up even a little bit, he's gonna look like a shorter person, and if you scale it down too much, he's gonna look like an unnaturally tall person, like a giant. Just something to keep in mind. Alright, moving on with the head, we're gonna put some flesh on that skull that we just modeled. We'll continue from where we left off and work a little bit more on fine-tuning those bony landmarks, adding a bit more definition to the eyebrows and the cheekbones. We have to be careful not to undo the structural study that we did with the skull, but rather build on what we already have and make it more specific to David. It's also important to keep things as simple as possible for as long as possible before getting into too much detail. Take the eye socket, for example. If you blur your eyes and try to look past all the complex forms, you'll be able to reduce it down to a couple of simple lines. Maybe a straight line at the top where the eyebrows are against the curved line of the lower eyelid. Finding that kind of simplicity within the design can save you from getting lost in the detail later on. Checking the profile view and making sure everything is in the correct depth. This is a good profile view, but the head is tilted forward, so we need to rotate it back a little bit. Make sure the eyes and the top of the ears, or where the top of the ears should be, line up horizontally. Moving on to the nose and mouth area. You can see that most of the structure is already in place because of our skull study. We now just need to add the muscle and skin on top of it. The mouth shape is a little unusual because the lips are invisible. They are rolled into the mouth and held between his teeth. The lips are pressed very tight against each other, which can be a little difficult to sculpt without some sort of trickery. We'll mask out the upper lip so that we can kind of crash the lower lip up into it. Increasing the resolution on the Dynamesh. Now let's try that masking trick again. Really interesting shapes on the chin there because of the skin getting pulled tight over the teeth. We're now getting into some of the musculature of the face. The masseter, probably the biggest muscle on the face, connecting the jawbone to the cheekbone, doing most of your biting and chewing for you. Filling in some of those muscles that move the upper lip, the levator labii superioris, the zygomaticus major and minor, etc. The trick here is also not to linger on too much at one place. Need to keep moving and see the whole picture. I know the lips are not working that well right now, but I don't want to stay on there and keep pushing it till I get completely lost. I'll move on to something else and then come back and look at it, hopefully with fresh eyes. Carving out the nostrils now. Interesting shape there. As you know, the lower part of the nose, which is the tip and the nostrils, is held up by pieces of cartilage and not bone. Cartilage is flexible, so when you hit your nose somewhere, it doesn't break so easily. The ears are cartilage too. No bones to break there either. Some of these shapes can be quite confusing, so it's a good idea to consult multiple images. You can also look at anatomy books or online resources on anatomy. The prominent top part of the nose, which is made of bone. The nose is probably not quite there yet, but we'll come back to it. It's no use pushing too hard when you're not feeling that you're making progress. Moving back to the eye area. We're gonna need an eyeball at this point. Those eyelids need something to wrap around. So we'll append a polysphere. Rotate it 90 degrees so that the axis points forward. That's where we want the iris. Scale it down to size. The diameter of the eyeball is quite important. A good starting point would be about 1/5 the width of the head at eye level. But then you can vary it according to how much curvature you want and how much of the eyeball you want to see from the side. The bigger the eyeball, the flatter it will seem. Making sure that the eyeball is at the right depth. We are using just the Z-axis now, so that we are moving the mesh only depth-wise and not sideways or vertically. Making sure that the thickness is even across the eyelid. The upper lid can be a little tricky because of the overhanging eyebrows. You can mask off the eyebrows if you need to, but it may not be necessary in this case. Overlapping a little bit onto the lower lid at the corner. That little bit of flesh on the inside corner is called the caruncle, I think. It's got something to do with the production of tears. Again, making sure of even thickness. This is one of those examples where the bone structure is visible right under the skin, like the edge of the eye socket. Just a bit more definition on the eyebrows. This is all just general fine-tuning, trying to get as close to the original as possible. Now we need to find a way to sculpt the irises. It's not clear what Bernini has done here. It seems to be somewhat damaged. We may have to look elsewhere for some clarity. Let's see what Michelangelo has done with his David. Alright, he has carved in circles for irises and then punched in a couple of holes for the pupils, leaving that bit of space for maybe light hitting the eyeball. Let's start by masking the area. It's good to start off with a fairly realistic looking radius. You don't want to make it too big like a cartoon character. Pushing in the iris a little bit. Make him look to the side. Lifting up the lower lid slightly for a more intense look. We'll leave it there for now. Now mirroring it to the other side. Now the eyelids look wrong because the ones on the right are not aligned with the iris. The eyelids are supposed to be wider open wherever the iris is, and it's the other way around on the right eye. So a little bit of corrective work there. Now for some more work on the eyebrows. Digging in with the damp standard for those sharp creases. We're starting to let go of symmetry at this point and making some uneven marks. I'm gonna sculpt those ears a little bit, even though they won't be seen in the final, because it's fun to sculpt ears. We're using the Sculptress mode on this, which generates mesh spontaneously as you sculpt. The smaller your brush, the denser the mesh it creates, because it assumes that you're going into more detail. Some really interesting shapes in the ear, mostly made of cartilage. Yeah, I forgot to turn on symmetry. We'll deal with it later. By the way, let me know in the comment section if anybody is interested in a separate video on sculpting ears. I can make one. Alright, let's deal with the asymmetric ear problem here. The topology is definitely quite messed up right now because of the Dynamesh and everything that we have done. So smart resim is probably not an option. We're gonna have to use a cut and mirror approach. What we'll do is separate the ears into a new subtool, delete the ear that we didn't sculpt, mirror the good one over to the other side, and we'll merge them back to the head. Okay, we have now split the ears into a new subtool. Now we'll isolate the left ear and do delete hidden. So we just have one ear now, and we'll mirror that ear to the other side. Okay, now we have a subtool with both the ears. Now we are gonna merge that onto the head subtool. Alright, now we update the Dynamesh. It's not a perfect fit, so we're gonna have to do some cleanup there. We'll do a bit more fine-tuning work on the face and hopefully get a little closer to the original as we progress. Adding a little musculature to the neck, that little protrusion on the skull behind the ear, which is called the mastoid process, and the muscle on the side of the neck which attaches on the mastoid process, which is called the sternocleidomastoid or just sternomastoid. It actually originates from 2 points, one on the sternum and one on the clavicle, and goes and inserts on the mastoid process. It's not really important to remember the names of all the muscles, but it's good to be familiar with a few main ones and their functions. Some unnecessary fine-tuning on the top of the head, which will be covered by hair. And some more unnecessary work on the ears, which will also be covered by hair. But it's good practice. Alright, that's it for part 1 in this series. Thanks so much for watching till the end. I really appreciate it. Stay tuned for part 2 where we attach David's head to his body, pose him and then sculpt some more. Until then, take care and don't forget to like and subscribe. Cheers.